Hi, I'm Rusty Wise with the Wise News Network, and tonight we're in Gastonia, North Carolina at the Gaston County Courthouse, where at the request of Gaston County Commissioners, Piedmont Lithium will give an update. It's been nearly 2 years since they've done an update, so stay tuned for more and we'll see what they have to say.
I'm Erin Sanders, as Chairman Brown just mentioned, but I will make a correction. Monique Parker will be presenting with me, and she will introduce herself shortly. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. It's been almost 2 years since we've had the chance to appear before you, but a lot has happened in 2 years, I think, for all of us. I believe that Piedmont Lithium is a different company than the one that appeared before you in 2021, and a different company than maybe many of you have met in the years prior. Today, Piedmont Lithium is a $1 billion market cap company, publicly traded on NASDAQ, with projects in Canada, Ghana, Tennessee, and here in North Carolina. And we are proud to be headquartered here in Gaston County. We celebrated a significant milestone last week as our joint venture in Quebec made its first shipment of lithium product, marking our shift from a lithium developer to a lithium producer and a revenue-generating company. Piedmont now has a leadership team that together has extensive experience in the mining industry, the lithium industry, in manufacturing, the environment, and community engagement on projects such as these. But perhaps most importantly, we've done extensive work since 2021 to further develop and refine our project plans for our proposed Carolina Lithium project, including significant testing and studies and meetings with the county staff about utilities and how we plan to mitigate the impact on neighbors and the environment. We've also met with countless neighbors, whether over their kitchen tables, in our Cherryville office, or out in the community, talking about concerns and answering their questions. We recognize that there were a lot of questions that we couldn't answer in 2021, and perhaps that we didn't communicate properly prior to that. We've been working hard to correct those errors and to help prove that we will be a good steward and a responsible steward of this project and within this community. We hope to answer as many questions as possible tonight, to mitigate your concerns, and potentially, hopefully, to open the door to more dialogue. That's our point, and we appreciate the opportunity. So let me begin with our proposed project. Carolina Lithium is what we call it. It's designed to create nearly double the current U.S. production of battery-grade lithium, which is all currently coming from just down the road right now in Bessemer City and Kings Mountain, but is desperately needed by the U.S. electric vehicle supply chain. Combined with our Tennessee project, which is now permitted, this would make Piedmont Lithium one of the key producers of American-made battery-grade lithium. We are designing the project on 1,548 acres to be one of the world's most sustainable lithium hydroxide operations, using modern technology, practices, and systems. We own, lease, or contract another 2,000 acres, which will help us to provide buffer around the project site. We are targeting construction for 2025 and first production in 27, of course, subject to permitting, approvals, and finance. And as we are currently 2 years away from potential construction, we are still developing and refining our plans. So we may need to update and develop further specifics over the next 2 years, but we want to answer as many questions as possible with the information that we have today. I think it's helpful to talk about quickly the three primary parts of the operation. As you'll see on the right-hand corner of this map, the first thing it will do is excavate the ore. That's the rock containing lithium is called spodumene. Then we'll move that rock via an enclosed conveyor belt system to the concentrator where the rock is crushed, and the spodumene, as well as the byproducts of quartz, feldspar, and mica, are separated out. Then that crushed spodumene concentrate will be conveyed to a conversion facility, that's number 3 on the map, to be processed into lithium hydroxide, or lithium salt, which is the battery-grade lithium that we'll sell as a product to automakers or battery manufacturers. Now, people ask us fairly often, why here? Is this an important resource? It absolutely is. The Carolina Tin Spodumene Belt is a geological wonder. There is nothing like this known currently in the U.S. It is the most significant spodumene resource in the U.S. in terms of size and infrastructure. It runs from Virginia to South Carolina, but its wider portion is Lincoln, Gaston County, and Cleveland County. Many of you know the history of the belt, that it once provided nearly all of the world's lithium supply, but then the U.S. sent business overseas to other countries. And that is why today China produces 80% of the battery-grade lithium in the world. But as we look to bring these resources and jobs back to the U.S., these resources in the belt are extremely important. This belt is believed to potentially contain more than 3 times the current known spodumene resources in the United States. And our geologists believe that it's only been 20% commercially explored. So that's why it's important to us and to the U.S. supply chain. But we also believe this project could be an important contributor to the economic health and prosperity of Gaston County. We're planning to invest more than $1.2 billion into building the project, and the construction will create 200 new jobs. We will utilize a host of vendors and suppliers, as many local as possible, and we know that in addition to those suppliers and vendors, potentially customers, there will be a need for more hotels, restaurants, housing, commercial space, retail shops, on and on. Once we're up and running, we expect to employ 428 employees directly at a compensation that averages $82,000. And we're aiming to hire as many local community members as possible. And that is why we will partner with Gaston College and the school system to set up training programs. Beyond the 428 direct jobs, we believe we'll create 1,000 jobs in this community related to the ripple effect of the project. And according to our fiscal impact study, $45 million in fiscal revenue to Gaston County in the first 5 years. And a total impact of nearly $4 billion in the first 5 years. I think the important thing today, we're going to answer a lot of questions, and Monique will talk about the details of water and air and traffic and all of those things. But I think what's important right now is that over the past few years of working with staff, we're determined to make 4 key commitments. Commitments to neighbor assurances, water line extension, reclamation, and community funding. So neighbor assurances, we plan to put a financial instrument in place that will allow a property owner, if they're unable to sell their home or property because of the project in a reasonable amount of time, fair market value, we will assist financially. And that's a commitment we're willing to make. We also know there's concern about wells, and Monique will talk about that more specifically. But if a well runs dry on one of our neighbors' properties due to the project, we will either drill a new well, drill a deeper well, connect the home to municipal water, and in the meantime, we'll supply water, but we will also make a payment to that homeowner that can help pay for water bills and for their inconvenience. The water line extension. We need municipal water for our project. So we have already agreed to fund the engineering study. We will also fund the construction of the water line. And that extension will not only help our project, but it will be available to neighbors and to businesses, including those in the future. And we would like to help establish a program that would allow neighbors to opt in if they would prefer to connect to municipal water, and those details will all be determined in the community development agreement. As far as reclamation, we've had lots of questions about how we're going to reclaim the land that we work on. We know that the state has a $1 million maximum surety bond. We're willing to put out a much larger surety bond to help make sure that long-term reclamation takes place, both for the mining pits and for the conversion facility. And last but not least, our community shared value commitment. Piedmont Lithium is committed to sharing value with communities that we work in. So we will be putting together a commitment that will be an annual payment to Gaston County to help fund and support well-being in this community. All of the details of these commitments will be determined as we move forward with the community development agreement.
My name is Monique Parker. I'm the Senior Vice President of Safety, Environmental, and Health for Piedmont Lithium. One of the things that I wanted to start with is, when I first came out of college, I moved to Gaston County. My son was born in Gaston County. So coming back to be able to support this project is extremely important to me. I've done safety, environmental, and health for the last 20 years. I've done things globally for the last 15, and then the last almost 10 years worked in the lithium market. So again, when I joined, this was near and dear to my heart to, one, come back to where I really started my career, and also to be able to help build a project that's going to be sustainable for the economy and globally for the world. One of the things that I feel is important and we want to share tonight is all the work we've done, as Aaron mentioned, over the last 2 years to help us understand better the environmental impact and studies and other things. So this is a very extensive list of studies that we've completed since 2019, numerous tests on our products, on our impacts, having agency communications and providing that information publicly. We have a ton of binders over here, about 5 big binders with all of these studies. We'll also make these same studies available at our Cherryville office on Main Street. We'll have it at the Gastonia Public Library, and also we'll have a version online so that everyone can see any study that we've completed and the details of those studies. Now what I'm going to do, we've been provided with questions that we know have come from various locations, and so I'm going to go through and try to answer each one of those questions, and obviously if there are more that come, we're happy to answer those following. But the first question we have is, how will Piedmont use municipal water at Carolina Lithium? As Aaron mentioned, we have to have water. We have to have municipal water for our lithium hydroxide conversion plant because of the quality and the purity of that water is going to be extremely important. So this picture here is a circular process to show how that water will be integrated into our site and how we will discharge that water. As you can see at the beginning on the left-hand side, this water will be supplied from Cherryville with a backup from Two Rivers. That then goes into a circular process where we look at how we'll use it from a people, a process, and a fire perspective. I'm going to start with fire because it's short and sweet and to the point. We bring that water in and we fill our fire tank. That fire tank will be there for emergency response and other activities that I'll go into later. When we look at people, obviously we have to have restrooms, showers, drinking water. The list goes on in regards to municipal water to be able to support those activities. And then our manufacturing process. As I noted, our lithium hydroxide conversion plant needs this water. Once we use that water in our process, we will then have an on-site wastewater treatment facility that will treat that water, and then we will send it to a wastewater pump station where it will be combined with the sewer water from the people use that will then be discharged back to Two Rivers. So one of the key points is any processed water from this process will go back into a wastewater treatment system through our sewer lines. I want to make a point, there's no discharge to streams and waterways from our processed water. I think that's a very important part to make, and one of the reasons why we want to invest in including water and sewer lines to our property to make sure we can support this effort. The next question is, how will the project impact water quality in wells, groundwater, and rivers and streams? So we've done extensive tests that we've already showed and talked about a little bit, but one of the things that we've learned is we will not materially change the composition of the groundwater. So what does that really mean, and how do we say that? One of the things I want to make sure when I say we won't materially change it, that means we're not going to contaminate wells. I know that that's been, a question or a thought that we continually get. How are we going to impact the wells? But based on the studies, we should not have any contamination to the wells. And I mean, I think everyone knows there are stringent regulations that we have to meet in order to even have our process and our operations. We're gonna do extensive monitoring and testing throughout the operations of our plant. I'll show in a little bit a different pictorial that shows how we're using groundwater, and we're gonna recycle that. Because when we open up the mine, groundwater will come into the pits, and there's a recycle process that we'll use. We also have the two rivers that I mentioned that all of our processed water will go to. And then one thing that I wanna make sure that we define, because a lot of mining operations have tailings ponds. That's some of the wastewater that gets stored in a pond, and a lot of times there are failures associated with that. Our project has no tailings ponds. So that is something that we will not have, and we'll talk about how we'll do reclamation and how where our waste will go and how we will treat it. The next question, how will the project impact local wells and water availability for residents and local businesses? As I mentioned, studies indicate there will be no widespread drying up of wells. I said we wouldn't contaminate the wells, but this is talking about how are we gonna impact them from the quantity of water that they're gonna get. We've done these studies, and one of the analogies I wanna give is, some people think the water table is like a bathtub. So you have this water table that's sitting there and it's just waiting for wells to come and pump out of it. But the reality of it is, you know, when you have a bathtub and you open up the drain and all of that water flows out, that's not what the water table really is. The water table sits in a layer above hard rock and even the material that we're gonna mine. And therefore, that's how it works. And I'm gonna show a pictorial that gets into a little bit more detail to be able to see that pictorially. But I'll get back to wells and water availability. Through the studies that we've seen, there are maybe 10 parcels that are non-Piedmont owned that could be impacted by drawdown of our mining operation. And so with that, we've already had the well mitigation plan, which Aaron went into details of how we will mitigate any wells that are impacted. But we also have one of the solutions, which is the extension of the water and sewer lines to come to that area. So when we talk about wells being impacted in groundwater, we feel we put a good plan in place to be able to understand and support what that looks like and ready to immediately respond. So freshwater, I mentioned what are we doing with groundwater, and I talked about that bathtub analogy with where the groundwater is. So we have fresh water that comes in. We open a mine. That water is going to flow into our pits. Once it comes into our pits, we will pump that water out, and it will go into what we call sedimentation ponds. Those sedimentation ponds are there to rest and allow us to treat, and if we need to, we will also, rest, test, and then treat if we have to. Once it's in those ponds, we plan to reuse that water. So we're gonna have a need for water for dust suppression and for our concentrator plant. So that's the number 2 process that Aaron showed in our pictorial of mining concentrator. We don't need the same quality of water for our concentrator operations, so that groundwater will be able to source the water that's necessary for that process. Any residual water that's left in those sedimentation ponds would then be discharged to the streams and waterways nearby. But again, remember, we're gonna be testing and we will treat if necessary prior to those discharges. Now, once the water leaves our concentrator plant, similar to our chemical plant, we are also going to pre-treat on site any processed water that comes from that concentrator plant. That processed water will then be pumped to Two Rivers to their wastewater treatment system. So that circular process starts with groundwater, but ends from a processing perspective at the Two Rivers for wastewater treatment, on top of our pre-treatment that we're gonna do on site. So I mentioned sedimentation ponds just in the previous slide. We have what we call sedimentation basins and sedimentation ponds. And sometimes those can be used interchangeably, but they're actually very different. Our sedimentation basins are what we use for basically stormwater, our erosion and sedimentation control. So the stormwater actually goes into those basins. We will then test as that water is going in and before it goes out to understand and treat if necessary before release. And that's the water, again, solely stormwater from the site. Now our sedimentation ponds, that's the ponds that we use for groundwater and stormwater, from a combination of understanding what that looks like. That's the same water that we'll reuse at our concentrator plant for our dust suppression, and then any water that's left would be discharged into streams. Both of these discharges are going to be covered under a permit through our NPDS system with the state of North Carolina. So we will have good understanding of what's going into these areas and what's going out, and make sure we have stringent requirements around them. Arsenic. I know we've heard many, many times about arsenic, and so the question is, will Carolina Lithium create or release arsenic into the local groundwater? I think there's a misconception that arsenic is used in lithium mining. That is not true. We do not create, use, or release arsenic from our operations. So when I talk about that, obviously I think many people are very aware there's naturally occurring arsenic in the groundwater around us today in Gaston County and other neighboring counties. That naturally occurring arsenic comes from some of the rock, the soil, and the groundwater due to volcanic rock activity in that region. So it's not there because we're mining it, because obviously we haven't mined yet, but it is there just naturally due to the anomaly of the geology that's there. So this pictorial hopefully helps me explain some of the things I was talking about earlier. As you see here, we have the water table, which is the blue lines that are there. And below that water table is the volcanic rock and our pegmatite, which hosts the spodumene ore. It is below the water table. As we mine, we're going to be removing that material. Then we're going to pump or dewater all of that water from the mine or the pit area into those sedimentation ponds that I discussed. So therefore, water can't drain back into the water table. Once it comes out, it's not going to go back in. One of the analogies that was given to me is, water likes the path of least resistance. So when it comes out, it's not going to go into those tiny crevices that it came from. It's going to want to go to where the large spaces are. And that's why it comes into the pit. How will waste be disposed, and will it be hazardous? So I'm just going to go through the various wastes we're going to have. The first is like any other plant, just normal dumpster waste, from our offices and other areas. Those things will go to a landfill and be disposed of properly. We will have a lab on site. That lab will have chemicals that would be deemed hazardous once we dispose of them. So there will be small amounts of hazardous waste that come from our site, primarily from the lab operations. Our conversion tailings. So again, our conversion is that lithium hydroxide plant. There are waste, and we call them tailings, that come from that operation. Those tailings may have some beneficial reuse that we're currently exploring and looking for aggregate recycle. But in the interim, they will be disposed of off-site at a properly permitted disposal location. The last two pieces of waste we have are what we call waste rock, which is the rock that doesn't have lithium or any of our byproduct materials in them. That rock will go into our commingling process to go back into our pits. So when I talked about reclamation, and Aaron was mentioning a reclamation bond, we're going to be doing progressive reclamation. So as we open a pit, once it's completed, we will refill that pit with our waste rock and our concentrator tailings that is a very fine sand that comes from that operation. Neither one of these are hazardous. So that material will go back. And again, I think it's important, I talked about a tailings pond earlier. We won't have those tailing ponds in our properties or impoundments to host this material. One, it's non-hazardous, and two, we have for reuse from a reclamation perspective. How will the project impact the air quality in the area? One of the things that's most important to understand is there will be no change to the air quality that currently exists differently from our property boundary today. So the air that people are breathing in the area is the same air they're going to breathe once our operations are there. We've done testing and modeling to understand what's going to come from our operation, looking at the controls we're going to have in place, and looking at our permit boundaries to understand the extent of that. We have a lot of emission and control equipment. We do monitoring and testing. And right now we're in the process of working with Department of Air Quality, DAQ, to obtain our air permit to be able to run our operation. Will Piedmont leave behind large open pits? The quick answer to that is no. There will be one pit that will remain open that will fill with water. But again, as I've mentioned previously, we're going to be doing progressive reclamation. We're going to backfill. We will have one pit open at a time, as I mentioned, and then the north pit, which you will see in this picture noted 4 for those that can see, will remain open, and we plan to own that area in perpetuity. So we will always understand what's there, what's the quality and quantity there, and how we will control it. And one of the things I think is important is that from a reclamation perspective, we want to be able to reuse this land once it's done. How loud and how long will each blast be? Modern blasts last seconds. So I know in the past there's a lot of history of mining in this area, and there's stories we've heard of, when the blasts go off, people having to go under desks and those types of things. Today's modern technology does not give that same result, so they last seconds. There are a lot of federal regulatory standards that are in place, and based on studies that have been done over 40 years, there's proof to show that if blasting is done within these federal regulatory standards, there are no structural damage. Obviously, those studies, not done by us because we haven't been around for 40 years, are evidence of what can happen as long as you're following in the guidelines. When we talk about blast, there are two things that we normally hear or get asked about: structure and nuisance. So I've mentioned structure and how that 40-year study, and we're going to be less than 50% below those federal standards. But then there's nuisance. What happens around the nuisance with blast? There are a lot of factors in what people are going to feel. The factors come from the direction that the blast is coming. What's the weather conditions for that day? How far are they from the blasting? Where are they located, indoors and outdoors? What we know based on studies is that those 2,000 feet from the blast may have a wind or vibration that they feel, and the farther away you get from that, the quickly it rapidly diminishes that impact. So I think that's important, and we have, again, many studies in our book to show what that looks like. We're often asked how often and will blasting occur. Initially, we plan to start blasting once a day, no more than twice a day. But there are also some scheduling requirements that will determine what that looks like. Due to the ordinance that was put in place in 2021, we know we can't blast 1 hour after until 1 hour after sunrise, and we must stop 1 hour before sunset. So that's a very short window, depending on the season, of when blasting can occur into that time frame. And you'll note no Sundays and certain holidays that have already been defined. We will follow those rules stringently. Is lithium hydroxide flammable? I can say from a standpoint of the chemistry of it, the answer is no. Lithium hydroxide, the material we are going to produce, is not flammable. There's some understanding of, recently there have been lithium fires in the area. Those were from lithium metals. We will not house on our site, we will not produce, we will not manufacture anything to do with lithium metals. So we don't have that same flammability profile. Lithium metal doesn't occur naturally in nature. So it's not like when you mine it, you unsource lithium metal. We unsource spodumene that hosts lithium. And so that same risk isn't there. And as I mentioned, and as Aaron said earlier, lithium hydroxide is a salt. So the flammability factors and the chemistry of it just don't allow it to do that. The product that we produce will go into batteries. We do not produce batteries. We produce the salt, and then we sell it to battery manufacturers or car manufacturers that then put it into batteries. So there will be no batteries on our property. What is Piedmont's emergency response plan? As I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a fire tank. We are a company that's currently working on developing our process, developing what our site looks like. So we are also developing that emergency response plan. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? We're going to be like any other manufacturing plant and have that plan in place. We're going to work with the local fire departments. We're going to work with the local emergency planning commission so we can make sure that we're meeting everybody's needs and that we have the right procedures in place and that we can support each other from a volunteer perspective in many cases or from an on-site perspective. The protections we do have in place, as I mentioned, is the fire water tank will be fully sprinklered. We're going to have fire hydrants all around the property. And last but not least, we're going to have visual and audible alarms to make sure everyone's aware of anything that's going on within the property. What is the expected lifespan of the Carolina Lithium Project? So I'm going to talk about the mine and the lithium hydroxide facility. The lithium hydroxide facility has a 30-year life. Typical manufacturing facilities put a 30-year life from a depreciation financial perspective on their manufacturing sites. We're no different. Now the mine right now has an 11.5-year lifespan. One of the reasons that is in order to define a mine, you have to have what's called technically available ore reserves. So right now, based on what we know and what we can technically say, it's 11 and a half years. But as Aaron mentioned, we know that there's double that amount of ore in the ground versus what we've been able to allocate for this 11 and a half years. And because of that, there is a potential that this lifespan would extend. But again, from a technical legal perspective, ore reserves have a very special definition, which is why we had to give it an 11 and a half year life. How will the facilities be decommissioned at the end of their useful life? One of the things that I think is important, we talked about economic impact. Once, when and if this plant is ready to be decommissioned, we will have a very skilled workforce that will be able to continue working in other industries in the area or go other places. Hopefully stay here, because obviously once you come to Gaston County, you never want to leave. But from a concentrator perspective, we would anticipate removing that and reclaiming the land where the concentrator plant is. For the lithium hydroxide facility, that could be converted or repurposed. If it cannot be converted or repurposed, we will have that surety bond in place that will ensure we have the necessary funding to remove and reclaim that land as appropriate. Property values. What kind of impact does Piedmont expect to have on nearby property values? Research shows that properties will not decrease, but likely increase. So there's a Phoenix Center study that underlines this point.
Hey, 1 second. We've already talked about this, and I asked before we started. This is why. I'm not gonna let it happen again. Let them have their time, you'll get your time, and we'll keep moving forward. Thank you.
We don't want you here. I'm leaving.
Make sure he's not coming back in. Go ahead, man.
Research by the Phoenix Center underlies the point that I just defined. Results of higher economic use of land is also seen when it comes from the studies that have been done. As we talked about before, there will be a fund available for those that may be negatively impacted, that may not be able to sell their homes or get a lower property value. So we're trying to do everything possible to support what we're stating in this area. So with that being said, I want to thank you all for your time and attention. We appreciate the opportunity to be able to answer as many questions that we will provide it. We're definitely open and ready to take more, but we thank you for your time.
Thank you, ma'am.
We have Monique Parker here with Piedmont Lithium. Monique, how do you feel about tonight's meeting?
I feel the meeting went very well tonight. Obviously, our goal tonight was to really be able to answer the questions of the commissioners and the community, and I feel like we achieved that.
I know some of the landowners, they really want to meet with you guys. Are they maybe meetings coming up in the future?
Yes, as Aaron mentioned during the session tonight, we are planning in the fall to have some town hall type meetings where we can really sit down with the community in settings where we can get questions, answers, and really just have a good conversation.
Well, with any operation, the fear of the unknown, that's the fear. So maybe with discussions with landowners and Piedmont Lithium, maybe some of those fears can be adjusted.
Yes, our goal is to educate. I mean, we're going through the last 2 years to educate ourselves, and now we want to take those learnings to educate the community around us.
How can you reassure the water issue that many citizens have?
Water, we know, is a major issue. Obviously, given a rural environment, given the number of community members on well water, it's something that we're very hypersensitive to. So the goal is for us, like I mentioned before, to continue to educate. One, for us to continue doing studies, to have the best technical knowledge we can in that area, and then use that knowledge to educate others around us what impact that's going to have and how it works. That's all we can really do, is continue to educate and learn ourselves, and continue to educate and teach those in the community around us to help them feel comfortable that we have the right mitigations in place and that their impact will be minimized.
Now, the mining permit, how long has the mining permit actually been in the North Carolina process?
So as of the 31st of this month, it will be 2 years. We submitted our mine permit application August 31st of 2021. So 2 years at the end of this month will be that process. And right now we're going through ADI 3, and we have until right before Thanksgiving to respond to that.
So I guess Piedmont Lithium is learning what the state's requiring during the permitting process.
Well, as you know, one of the things that we've talked about previously is North Carolina hasn't had lithium mining in multiple years. And so it's a process. Yes, there's mining ordinance and those types of things, but lithium mining is different. And so it's been an education process for us, for the state, so that we can all make sure that what we're doing is comfortable, that it's understood, that it's legally enforceable. And that's our goal. So yes, it's taking a long time, but the due diligence that's being done, we feel is necessary, not only to protect the state, but us and our community as well.
Now, if this is approved, this will probably be one of the largest lithium mining operations in the U.S. Is that correct?
That's what we understand as far as we know today, from a hard rock perspective.
Now, there's other processes as far as other than hard rock. Is Piedmont Lithium exploring any other processes other than hard rock?
Our strategy is hard rock mining. Obviously, there's brine mining, which is very water intensive. We want to be sustainable. Doing brine mining eliminates some of the sustainability targets and efforts that we're looking to establish. And so we will keep our strategy on hard rock mining.
Now, there's been conflicting reports about the spodumene content in the vein. Some people say it's very rich in spodumene. Some people say they're not. Can you answer that question?
I'm not a geologist, but what our geologists do tell us is that it's one of the richest veins that is known right now. I'm not going to say known in the world, but known in the U.S. in regards to its purity. We will continue to do testing and evaluation and exploration to continue to refine that. But we feel, based on what our geologists say and the testing we've done, that it is a very rich base.
Well, Monique Parker, thanks for speaking to us. Have a great day.
Thank you.